So I was a vegan for a long time, over 10 years of my life, and I wanted to watch this video about it, and let's talk about it.
Veganism has exploded in popularity across the world. For some, it's out of sympathy for animals, but increasingly, many are swapping diets due to the environmental and health claims.
So I have a really interesting relationship with veganism and vegetarians in general, and most of what I feel about veganism is that it is generally pretty unhealthy a lot of the times. Now, there are a lot of people who do veganism right, and for everybody, diet is different, and you can survive on different things. For me, it was extremely unhealthy, and I did it for a very long time. I did a whole bunch of different versions of veganism, everything from being a raw vegan at one point to being vegetarian, to being pescatarian, to doing all these different kinds of things, and I just never found a way to make it work for me. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that vegans say that are just kind of lies about things. And I make a joke about vegans a lot of times. Once again, I'm not saying this to be insulting to people. It's a joke that I make. It's not a very good one. But I say that you either see vegans who are very overweight or they're sickly skinny a lot of times. You know, there are some vegan bodybuilders out there, and I appreciate those people. But in general, there's a lot of issues that come along with it. And I think that a lot of the rhetoric that vegans use to get people involved with veganism are a lot of times lies. But here's a big caveat. I think that eating animals is wrong. I think that it's morally wrong to go through and eat animals. And I think that one of the things that we'll look back on in this period of our lives, in the future 100 years or whatever, we're going to look back and we're going to say, wow, can you believe that they killed animals and ate their flesh? Because I think that we will have lab-grown meat and people will largely stop eating killed animals. And I think that it will be looked at as being an insane thing that people used to do, because it is kind of insane. I mean, the intelligence of animals is ridiculously high, of all different kinds, but I do think it's difficult right now to consume a vegan diet, get enough protein, get enough micronutrients, get all the things that you need. We're not wired to do that. We have different kinds of teeth for eating meat and for eating vegetables. We're omnivores. We've been omnivores for a very long time. And, you know, I think it's really difficult. I think it's tragic. I do. I wish that I could be healthy and do the things that I want to do and live my life in a way without eating animals, but I just have come to a conclusion that that's not possible for me.
Claims. But are these claims even accurate? Like, does going vegan actually make a noticeable difference on the planet?
And I'm like the vegan's worst enemy whenever they get me into a conversation, because I have one of the least popular opinions that you can have that's hated by both animal eaters and vegans alike, which is that statement of, yeah, it's wrong to eat animals. And yeah, I still do it. I don't know what else to tell you.
Or are those impacts over-exaggerated? And is it even healthy at all? Or is the lack of animal proteins and nutrients actually detrimental to your body? While a lot of claims have been made over the years, our access to good quality studies has only really just started to become accessible. So let's dive in. First up, is going vegan better for the environment? This is the easy part of the video because the answer is super simple. Yes.
Yeah, factory farming is definitely very detrimental to the environment. The amount of methane and things that are put into the atmosphere through factory farming seem to be detrimental. This is sort of difficult, though, because we don't actually have really concrete evidence about things. And I don't want to talk too much about that because I'm not super well versed in that topic, but I know that there is lots of debate about climate change and all of the issues that are going on, and whether, you know, is this a thing that is just because there are so many humans? What's the deal with everything that's happening? What are the causes? We don't really have great evidence.
Point blank,
it's hard to track.
Yes. Avoiding meat and dairy products has a major impact on the environment. Study after study after study has found that a vegan diet, as compared to a full-on meat-eating or omnivorous diet, or even a vegetarian diet, uses less land, conserves more water, and produces less greenhouse gases, by about 70 to 80% compared to omnivorous diets. And that's a huge difference. Now, that's not to say every vegan food is created equal. We have an entire video breaking down which alternative milk is the best for the environment, and even there you can see that something like almond milk takes a lot more water to create than other alternatives. But on the whole, transitioning to a vegan or even vegetarian...
And that's the super difficult thing about, and the war that vegans are always going to fight, is this uphill battle of the superiority complex of, yeah, you're vegan, but are you eating the right foods? Yeah, you're vegan, but those things aren't raised with, you know, those vegetables aren't what's it called, renewable farming. This sort of moral superiority, because a lot of people, I'm not saying that vegans are by nature this way, but I talk about this a lot when I talk about religion, that it attracts a certain type of people. And in the case of veganism, a lot of people become vegans, and those people are people who want to feel superior, and they're looking for a way that they can be superior, and the veganism thing is the way that they do it, and they become these really annoying people who are just constantly trying to tell you about everything that you're doing wrong, and nothing you can do will ever make you good in their eyes, because they need to feel superior to you.
Vegetarian diet will significantly decrease your personal impact on the planet. Of course, simply reducing your meat and dairy consumption can also make a difference, so it doesn't have to be so black and white. But full stop, a vegan diet is better for the environment and the future of our planet. Alright, on to the more complicated subject of diet. Interestingly, some of the first athletes on a strict plant-based diet were the gladiators. All fighters' diets contained large amounts of legumes, pulses, and grains, and contained little to no animal protein.
Well, this is because it was a very cheap diet. I hope that he gets into this topic, but the reason that they ate these things wasn't from choice, wasn't because they were trying to be... I've watched that Game Changers documentary in the past, and one thing that's really gets left out a lot of times, that people didn't choose to do this. Gladiators were slaves a lot of times, and they were being used in blood sport. They were being put into, we say, athletes, like they were superstars, and some of them I'm sure were, but they were being used to kill each other for the amusement of crowds of people, and they were kept in barracks that were dark and dingy, and they were thrown breads and slop that was moldy to eat to keep themselves alive, because they weren't worth the investment, because they knew they were going to be dead in the coming weeks. They put them into rings with bears and lions and things. This isn't you don't want to be like the gladiators.
Protein. But it's only recently that research has delved into the question of whether or not a vegan diet can not only enhance athletic ability, but bolster overall health in the long term. One of the big questions that comes up a lot is, did we evolve as vegetarians or meat eaters? I mean, we've got these sharp canine teeth that look just perfect for digging into flesh. Though large canines are not exclusive to carnivorous animals. It's thought they likely evolved more for intimidation and competition among...
We ate animals. That is a really difficult thing to cue out. And you know that because we can look at tribes that are uncontacted, and they eat animals. They drink blood, and they eat flesh of animals, and they eat all the parts. They do that. This is a thing that people do. Whether or not we evolved to do it, I mean... I think that's a pretty hard thing to say that we didn't, because we did it. So if we were consuming that, I mean, it's a whole different thing. People love to bring up that statement of oh, you know, bulls get really, really big and buff and all this stuff. Cows have different stomachs than us. They have two stomachs that help them break down grass so that they can turn it into muscle. There's a lot of other things going on that are really, really complicated and complex. And that's why whenever I talk, a lot of times when I talk to a vegan, a lot of times they're young people and they're really idealistic people. And I have no problem with those things. But the sort of, you're such an idiot for not knowing this sort of rhetoric that they have implanted into their brain, that they try to force onto other people, is rhetoric that is not very valuable to me. I've thought about these things. I understand the arguments that you're making. I just don't think that they're true.
Mates as well as defense rather than for eating meat. And if we look at the diets of modern primates, the ones...
And I get it. I say, you know, if you're really into that circle and you're into that group, and then also you really believe that this is a moral atrocity that people are committing, wouldn't you be fighting for it as well? I understand it's valid. You're totally allowed to feel that way. I just think it's such an odd thing to try to force your beliefs on other people.
We're closely related to, like chimp.
And I know that there's going to be people who are like, oh, I watched a video about a guy who's It's my video. I made a video about it. Whatever.
Orangutans and gorillas, you'll see that most of them have totally plant-based diets. I love thinking about chimps being hipster vegan.
I didn't know if this guy's a vegan or not. It seems like I've stumbled into vegan propaganda here. I thought this was going to be a look at it from both sides. But if it's all positive things about being a vegan, there's no way that it's actually looking at it from both sides. 'Cause there are reasons to not be vegans.
Vegans like, oh, you don't have any soy milk? Awkward. But
Chimpanzees eat other monkeys.
seriously, if gorillas can get this jacked without the need for animal proteins, surely we're not meant to be eating meat. I mean, look at those muscles.
Yeah, we have stumbled into vegan propaganda here. If this is what you want to think about and you want to obscure your thoughts from a huge portion of science and just facts that we have observed over time about the increased amount of protein and the building of muscle and all of those things, and how gorillas are just a completely different being than we are and have different ways of manufacturing protein sources in their body and absorbing proteins through different things and making muscle through different ways, that's fine. But I urge you to maybe think a little bit about the fact that we are not gorillas.
Me throwing to our video on bestiality. Anyway, many suggest that because we branch off the same evolutionary tree as our primate contemporaries, surely we're also primarily vegetarian.
So maybe he
We've
won't
also
be.
got
Let's
bumpy
see.
colons, which sounds very sexy, whereas carnivorous animals typically have a smooth colon. But despite all these facts, the truth is there is no denying that our species turned to eating meat regularly. In fact, scientists estimate that our ancestors started eating meat around 2 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens even existed. We've even found fossilized animal bones that were cut up for dinner that are around 2.5 million years old. It's theorized that somewhere along the way our environment changed. We weren't in a tropical forest anymore and didn't have access to as many plants that we could stomach.
Totally.
So we turned to meat to supplement that loss. And of course, there are many theories about how meat shaped the human brain, but for now, all we need to know.
Well, and humans were just everything in the world is just sort of looking for something to eat. And before we had societies, before we had language, before we had these things, whatever wouldn't kill us that we could put in our mouths and would make us feel less hungry, we would do that with. It wasn't a thought of, oh, I guess I'm going to have to supplement my diet with something else since I no longer have access to all of those yummy bananas. It was more just, like that sort of thing. People weren't what we are today. And it's interesting to take modern thoughts about what we are now that we've societally evolved and put that onto these old ancient civilizations, and not even civilizations, just groups of human-like creatures, and assume that they were having these kinds of thoughts it's like when you personify animals and give them personalities. And I know that animals do have personalities, but when you take it to the point of thinking about them as people, they're not people, they're animals. They're different.
Know is that while we do come from plant eaters, we have been eating meat for millions of years. As long as we've been human,
And we don't come from plant eaters. We didn't evolve from chimpanzees. We had common ancestors, and then those trees branched off, and we're over here now, and they're over here now, but we come from common ancestors. We don't know what those common ancestors did. This is the assumption. This is the theory currently. We don't know what they did.
in eating meat. So then,
Don't have
can we
photos.
survive without meat at all? Some people
Yes.
might tell you that you simply can't get enough protein without meat, but that's really not true. You can get tons of protein from whole grains, nuts, and beans, and for most people,
You totally can. The difficulty can come into, can you stomach all of that, and can you eat that many carbs as well? Because there's a lot of carbs and a lot of plant-based protein sources. And if you're someone who wants to get 120 grams of protein a day, a lot of times you're eating a vegan diet. Sometimes you have to eat a lot of carbs with that, and those carbs add extra calories, so then you're gaining extra weight, and you can become out of a condition that you want to be in because of that. So there's definitely issues with it. It's possible, yes, you can drink protein supplements. There's pea protein powders. We have some of those in the house currently. But I mean, something like a veggie burger has like 9 grams of protein. A similar portion of actual red meat can have 25 or 30 grams of protein. And in order to get that much protein from the veggie burger, you'd have to eat so many of them that your calories would be dramatically increased as well. And so then you have all of these other problems that come into play with that. Yes, it's possible. Obviously, it's possible. There are vegan bodybuilders. There are vegan athletes. There are vegans out there who are in great condition. There are people have been surviving without meat for a long time now. I don't know how long veganism has been a thing, but obviously it's possible. I don't think that can be an argument that gets made. It's just that, is it something that is healthy for most people? Can you consume, that many legumes every day? Can you eat that much fiber every day and your stomach handle it? Can you digest all of that well? Can you actually get at that stuff through breaking it down and processing it into your body? These are questions that are more personal, and why I don't like the prescription of this is going to work for everybody or everyone should do this, because you can't do that with diet. People have things that they can and can't eat. Tiff is allergic to everything. I mean, eggs, rice, gluten, milk, just so many things. It's really difficult for her to get everything that she needs in a day to eat. And she also can't eat that much because she has digestive issues. So there's a lot of things at play, and it's really difficult to ever just prescribe one thing to everybody and say it's going to work.
This is more than enough. In fact, most research finds protein deficiency extremely rare, except in people who are simply not eating enough calories.
Yeah.
But what research has...
But there's a thing that happens when you eat lots of protein, which is that your satiety is much higher. This is a thing that I found. A high protein diet works really, really well for me being at a healthy weight, maintaining my weight. That's something that does a really good thing for me. Eating lots of egg whites, eating lots of lean meat, and eating Greek yogurt, things like that, and then getting micronutrients through vegetables and broccoli and legumes and things like that. That's what really does good for me and makes me feel good. And when I was on a vegan diet, I was very lethargic all the time. I had a lot of gastrointestinal issues, just too much fiber. I was probably getting 80 or 90 grams of fiber a day because I was eating lots and lots of things with tons of fiber in it. I think that the majority of people would feel better if they would get more vegetables in their diet, for sure. Now, whether or not you should eat those things only is up to you and your decision. I just don't like the propaganda being pitched that is obviously of an agenda of trying to lie to people to get them to do a thing. I never like that. I never think that's good. And I know that you think that you have good intentions when you're doing this. And I know that people get on these holy missions to make the world a better place, and they think any means necessary, but I don't believe in any means necessary.
Found is missing from a vegan diet is B12. Vitamin B12 is required by animals for a whole host of biological pathways and for normal functioning. And the thing is, you cannot get B12 from any vegetables. There's zero B12 in a salad. You can find it in beef, pork, poultry, fish, eggs, etc. And studies find that B12 deficiencies are a big problem for a lot of vegans
It's a supplements B12.
and vegetarians. When your levels are low, it can impact brain functioning, energy, and mood, and at worst, it can cause full-on hallucinations. I mean, if that's what you're going for, maybe just try some psilocybin instead. Me throwing to our video on shrooms. So if you're only consuming fruits and vegetables, it'll likely become a problem. Luckily, supplements are a thing. You can literally just take B12 pills and then you never have to worry about this. The same can be said for other nutrient deficiencies.
This is obviously a vegan coded video. And I don't think that that's a horrible thing, but I'm definitely going to give my opinions on the things that are being said. And I don't begrudge this person for having these feelings. You're throwing to a vegan market, and that's totally fine. I get what you're doing, and I'm proud of you for being out here and doing it and chasing your goals.
That tend to pop up for vegans, like iron or omega-3s. There's even a ton of foods that are fortified with these to make vegan diets less of a risk. But another area that brings up some concern is bone strength. If you grew up in the
And the reason I say this is a vegan coded video is because everything in this video says this is a potential problem with veganism, but here's what you could do to solve it. And it's just, or you could eat a diet that is filled with a variety of foods, including animal products. And you could live that life as well. And I think a lot of people become vegans because either it's trendy or because they want to be healthier. And I don't necessarily think that being a vegan is healthier. I just don't. I think that if you do everything perfectly, then yes, it can be as healthy as eating an omnivorous diet. But I don't think that that's what most people do. I know lots of vegans. I was a vegan for a long time. It was very popular when I was a kid. People like Ollie Sykes and Never Shout Never, Christopher Drew, people like that really popularized vegetarianism and veganism. And it was really pitched us hard. PETA was big in the Warped Tour scene and this sort of musical scene that was going on. It was very rare for people in that scene to not be vegetarians or vegans. This is a very common thing that you saw amongst a lot of people. And a lot of people eat very poorly when they're vegans. They eat Oreos and they eat Nutter Butters and they eat tofu cheesecake recipes and they eat processed meat replacements and all these things that have downsides. High sodium is a problem that can come from veganism. Your cholesterol levels can be a problem because you get a lot of plant oils and seed oils from those, which seed oils aren't actually as bad for you as people want you to believe, but still, there are things that can go wrong with a vegan diet. And it's very common because those foods are the ones that are the most available for people, and they're also the most fun to eat. And people tend to eat what's the most fun to eat instead of what's the most optimal to eat.
90s and early 2000s, then you're more than aware of the many campaigns touting the health benefits of milk. Calcium is an essential part of the human diet because it helps your muscles and nerves function properly and keeps your bones good and strong. And when you don't have enough in your diet, your body actually ends up pulling it from your bones, which can potentially make your bones more likely to break. Hence, cow's milk, which naturally contains calcium and is absorbed easily into the body, is often promoted for good, strong bones. And a research study from 2020 backed this up when it found that vegans have a much higher risk of breaking their bones than meat eaters. This was a study that followed around 2,000 vegans and compared them to non-vegans over the course of a few decades, and their risk of bone breaks was basically twice as likely. But here's the weird part. When we look at countries that simply don't drink as much milk as a whole, this pattern doesn't hold. For example, in West Africa, consumption of dairy isn't that common, and yet they have extremely low rates of osteoporosis, like a fraction of a percent.
Well, this could be a whole other thing, too. We're assuming that it's because of calcium. You're equating the breaking of bones to a lack of calcium, but bone density is affected by strength training as well, and by being active. If you stand for long periods of time, your bones are denser because they have to support your weight for a longer period of time. And if you're eating a vegan diet and maybe you're becoming more and more lethargic because you're malnourished, you're not getting enough of the right nutrients, and you're not eating enough of the things that make you feel like being active, maybe you're being less active and then your bones are getting less dense. And in West Africa, I'm going to make the guess that they don't have the luxury of being less active. So that could be a thing. I mean, I don't know. I'm just making something up off the top of my head, but there's tons of other reasons that could be.
And a study that compared 40 countries' consumption of dairy also found that those who had little milk were not any more likely to break their hips.
This is what I think, is that you're equating two things that might not, and you're just running with this assumption to try to fit a narrative.
Even studies within the same country have found confusing results. When comparing heavy milk drinkers to light milk drinkers, there's really not a clear link between bone strength and breakage. The truth is, dairy isn't the only way to consume calcium. It's in lots of veggies like kale, bok choy, and broccoli, and there's even fortified foods like orange juice and cereal that contain it. But for vegans, even when studies account for
I love the different sects of health of influencers. People will tear down fortified foods like crazy and say, oh, these fortified foods make you sick with all those heavy minerals that are being put in artificially. And then there's people who need those fortified foods because they don't get their nutrients anywhere else. And they say, oh, these fortified foods are a godsend. The noise in how to be healthy in this world is insane. And people don't even know what healthy is. For me, healthy is just the idea that I can get to the gym 4 days a week. I feel like I have plenty plenty of energy. I do all the things that I need to do and keep up with my responsibilities, and I feel good day to day. That's all health means to me. And for me, a great way to do that is to maintain my weight, to control what I eat, to not eat too much of what we would consider to be junk food, and to have a nice, balanced, healthy diet.
Calcium intake, those who were eating lots of calcium
That's how I
were
feel the best.
still more likely to break bones. So perhaps there is another environmental or situational factor outside of diet that's playing a role here and is yet unknown. It's worth bringing up that most of this data is on adults, and studies that do look at kids are much more clear-cut. Kids that drink milk break fewer bones than those who don't. Finally, on the bad side, researchers...
That's why there was a big push to have milk in schools, and that's why there was a big push to have flavored milks as well, like chocolate milk, or in Asian countries, all the fruit milk, strawberry milk, banana milk, that kind of thing. Oh, look, Tiff's back. No, you're not. You getting the hoodie? And that's because there were studies that were done that eating or drinking milk for children, even if there was sugar in it, was better than them not drinking milk. Because if you remember back in the day, kids got rickets a lot and had large issues. I don't know if you've ever read Angela's Ashes, but that's such a telling story of what it was like to have a child in the early 1900s, when people would just give their kids sugar water and their bones would get brittle and they would have breakages all the time.
Has found that both vegans and vegetarians are at a higher risk for stroke. However, the overall risk is small, around 3 extra cases per one.
I love statistics like this. So, if your risk of stroke in general, I don't know what that number would be. I'm going to say 6%. Let's say 6%. Feels like a good number. If your risk for stroke is 6%, and smoking cigarettes makes your risk for stroke 45% higher, that's not saying that your risk for stroke is now 51%. It's 45% of 6 over again. So it's like 2.7 or whatever 45% would be of 6. And that over again. So it goes from 6% to 8.7, which is a big enough jump that you don't want to have it. I would love to have that jump in an MMO of 2.7%, and I would hate to have it in the risk of having stroke. But the numbers are often presented in a way that makes you confused about what's actually happening, and they try to use the biggest number they can think of to scare you.
1,000 people over 10 years, and this particular study had many limitations, including quite a small sample, so it's difficult to draw major conclusions from it. So are there any specific health benefits to going vegan? Definitely. A study on over 90,000 people found that vegans are less likely to develop high blood pressure, obesity, type 2 diabetes, some types of cancer.
Now, I have high blood pressure, and it developed while I was vegan. And I think, I mean, I don't know this. I could just have predisposition for it. I know that I have some narrowing of my ventricles, but I think that it was because of all the sodium, truly, and all the super highly processed vegan food that I was eating.
Cancer and
because that's who I am. I like ready-made, easy-to-eat junk food. That's what my mind. I was raised on it. I was raised on lunch cakes and Pop-Tarts and Cinnamon Toast Crunch and cocoa beets and sugar in my oatmeal, and it just these cinnamon toast and just these really simple frozen pizzas, Totino's pizza rolls, bagel bites, these kinds of foods. And so when I'm in a diet, I often try to find stuff that is reminiscent of that stuff. And so being a vegan for me was difficult because I ate foods that weren't very good for me. And I'm not somebody who can just eat a whole bunch of broccoli and kale salads with legumes and chickpeas, and it's not what I'm going to do. I wish I could. I wish I was that type of person. I wish my brain worked like that, but it unfortunately doesn't.
More likely to live longer. A vegan diet lowers cholesterol, and many of these foods contain a lot of antioxidant phytonutrients and nitrates versus some animal products which contain more pro-inflammatory fats. These anti-inflammatory effects are believed to be the reason vegan diets seem to minimize some autoimmune diseases. In fact, Venus Williams, who suffers from Sjogren's syndromes, credits her vegan diet with minimizing the extreme fatigue associated with her condition. Some studies have even found a vegan diet to be one of the healthiest, outperforming even pescatarian and vegetarian diets, likely because of its higher fruit, vegetable, and legume intake. There was up to a 32% lower risk among those with the highest intake of plant-based foods for cardiovascular disease,
What is the risk of cardiovascular disease? In the general population, preferably. Why is it so hard to find this information? By 2050, that's such a strange one to do currently. What is the risk of cardiovascular disease? Why is it so hard to find this information? I want to see what this number actually is, how big 26% decrease is, because a 20 or a 32% decrease, because that would be pretty good. If it actually is 60% is the risk, but then what that is in terms of what our risk already is. But
these, even after adjusting for age, sex, race, education, health behaviors, alcohol intake, and exercise. So yes, on average, the health of vegans does tend to be better. Of course, it's also possible that vegans are just generally more health conscious to begin with. Vegans do tend to smoke less, drink less alcohol, and exercise.
I know plenty of vegans who do all of these things.
More, and whether it's something bad in meat and dairy or helpful in all the extra veggies is yet to be determined. Of course, it's worth pointing out that it's just as easy to be an unhealthy vegan with all the options for junk and processed food nowadays, so in no way
French
does
fries
going
are vegan,
vegan necessitate a healthier diet automatically. The biggest question remaining is, can it make you a better athlete? A NERMI study following 8,000 runners from across Europe comparing meat eaters, vegans, and vegetarians.
And if you've never been on a vegan diet and you're curious about it, I mean, go ahead and try it. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't like it and then you come off of it. You don't have to tie your entire personality to being vegan. But if you do try it and it's really good, then you've won. You know, you have a great new way of living. Like I said, I just think that I grew up from the time that I was 12 until the time that I was 22 years old. I was a vegetarian/vegan. A lot of that was spent vegan. And there's a lot of propaganda out there.
Is currently testing this idea of improved endurance. Because veganism may boost immunity and aid in recovery and rehabilitation from injury, a lot of athletes are keen to take advantage of these perks. Veggies like beetroot contain nitrates that aid in blood flow and oxygen transport through the body. But the problem right now is simply the lack of good data. There is very little data to support these claims right now, so studies are ongoing. At the very least, it's been shown that a well-planned vegan diet does meet the nutritional requirements for endurance athletes. In other words, it's just as good at the very least as an omnivorous diet. Whether it's optimal is yet to be determined. At the end of the day, what can we conclude from
this is what I keep saying, and this is the truth, is I don't think that there's anything special about a vegan diet. I think that eating foods that are healthy for you and eating foods that are unhealthy for you in more moderation is obviously going to be good. And a lot of people who become vegan probably, like he said, are more health conscious individuals, but you can be health conscious eating omnivorous diet. That being said, I do think it's a moral problem to eat animals. I don't think that it's good to kill other things that are alive to eat them. It feels like a horror story when you hear it. And I think that most people, if they were really honest with themselves, would agree with that statement, but I still do it.
Available research. Well, on the one hand, a vegan diet is unequivocally better for the environment. And while it's a whole other conversation to talk about the responsibility of corporations and institutions versus individuals, as an individual, it is a simple step that you can take to minimize your impact.
It's not simple, it's very
When
difficult.
it comes to diet, at worst, there could be some setbacks to your health, but those can typically be mitigated through careful planning and supplementation, and at best, it may actually be better for your overall health and well-being if you put in the effort to do it with intention and health in mind. I hope this video has been eye-opening for those of you who are curious. I know there's a lot of concern around companies capitalizing on claims that may or may not be exaggerated. I think it's totally fair to be skeptical. The vegan market is estimated to hit 24 billion by 2026, so we all need to have our bullshit meters up. If you want to know more, we have an entire podcast episode on veganism that covers more research and studies and different angles. You can click that and head over to the YouTube.
Like I said, I don't have any problems with vegans. I'm not trying to debate vegans on whether or not they should be vegans. If it works works for you and you're enjoying it, that's awesome. I'm not the kind of guy who's like, I'm eating 2 hamburgers to make up for a vegan who didn't eat 1 hamburger. I'm not that guy. I don't think that that's a good way to be. It's antagonistic and problematic in general, and it's just lame to me. But in general, I don't think that anyone should try to force their opinions on other people. And a lot of times you see that from people who are like vegans because they're in some kind of holy war. It's the same reason that people who are really religious try to force their opinions on people because they think they're saving people from eternal hellfire. And if you thought that's what you were doing, wouldn't you push those ideas on people as well? But I just don't agree with that sort of statement. But yeah, so that's it, guys. Go like the video or whatever, if you liked it. Peace.